Welcome to Veterans AZ. Our guest on this episode is a man whose life has been defined by service, in the air, in the community, and in the quiet persistence of remembrance. Steve Ziomek is a United States Coast Guard veteran who spent over a decade flying rescue helicopters and other aircraft in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. After transitioning to a successful civilian career, Steve recently turned his attention to preserving a piece of overlooked history, the Thunderbird Field 2 in Scottsdale, where more than 5,500 pilots prepared for combat overseas during World War II. In this conversation, we talk about the missions that shaped Steve's service, the teamwork that saved lives, and the passion driving his mission to ensure the stories of World War II aviators are never forgotten. Well, I'm here with Steve Ziomek, a United States Coast Guard veteran whose service has shifted in recent years to creating a permanent, lasting memorial to military aviation in Arizona. Steve, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kelly.
Let's start at the beginning with your background. What inspired you to become a pilot, and how did that lead you to the United States Coast Guard?
Well, I grew up in Gary, Indiana. My dad was a World War II vet. He was actually a drill sergeant, and I lived a drill sergeant's son's life. And he always used to take us out to the local airport to watch all the airplanes. I think when you do that, it gets caught in your mind, and you just want to do that. And then I ended up going to the United States Coast Guard Academy. And after I graduated, actually before graduation, I'm thinking, do I want to be at sea where it's 50-foot waves and all this all my life? I said, no, I'd rather fly. So then I applied, and after spending 9 months at sea, I applied to flight school and went to Navy Flight School, which is down in Pensacola, Florida.
And so what's your first experience with the stick of an airplane in your hand, so to speak? What did you learn on?
Well, we learned on a T-34 Bravo, which is like the military version of a Bonanza. And then we graduated into the T-28 Trojan, which is a high performance, you could put it against any World War II fighter. In fact, it held all the time to climb records to 10,000 feet until the F-4 Phantom came along. So that was nice. And then at that point, you make your choice. Do you stick with fixed wing, or do you go with rotary wing, helicopter? And the Coast Guard it had some bigger planes, but I wanted to fly helicopters. So I branched off and flew helicopters. And the neat thing about flying helicopters for the Coast Guard, because you go through Navy flight training first, and you fly fixed wing and then rotary wing, if you're at a unit that has both, you get to fly both. So I went from flight school to San Francisco International Airport, which is where the Coast Guard Air Station was. Flew primarily helicopters, but got to fly the U-16 Albatross. Jimmy Buffett has one. And then a little bit of C-130 transports as well.
That's quite a range of aircraft. So kept your skills sharp, it sounds like.
Kept them sharp. And the Coast Guard, I've always say it's the hidden secret. Because if you look at all the branches, all the services, everybody trains for a mission. But the Coast Guard, I think, is the only branch of the service that trains for their mission, and they perform their mission every day. All the others, Army, Navy, Air Force, you name it, they're out, they're training for war, and with the hopes that war never comes. So they don't really get to utilize all those skills that they train for.
But not so in the Coast Guard. And so a lot of what you've done, I imagine, is as a rescue pilot.
Yeah.
And so can you talk us through what that's like, and whether there are any particular missions or scenarios that stick with you after all these years?
Yeah, it's all rescue, and primarily with the helicopter. And the neat thing about the helicopter and the Coast Guard with rescues, I looked at my logbook, there are probably 75 people that are living today that I pulled out of the water or a sinking boat or something. So that gives you a sense of thrill and accomplishment and honor. But there's one that I'll never forget. It was in San Francisco. We got called, we were watching TV at 9 o'clock at night or so, and the gong went off, and there was a boat sinking underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. So we jumped in the helicopter and went out. And in the Coast Guard, if you have a rescue case where there's always an on-scene commander. And in this case, because it was underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, pretty close to shore, the on-scene commander was on the shore because there are a lot of Coast Guard units involved. Boats that really couldn't get to the boat that was sinking because of all the rocks and the bad weather. We probably had 30, 40 knot winds and everything. And so they wanted us to be out there just to shine what we call a night sun, a big bright light, so everybody could see what they're doing on this rescue. And because the fire department and the Coast Guard had shot high line from the shore to the boat, and they were trying to get these people off, hooking them on a high line and pulling them in. And then after about an hour of hovering there, I said, you know, if I don't start hoisting these people, they're going to die. So I told the on-scene commander, I'm going to start hoisting. He says, no, do not hoist. And I said, basically, the heck with it. They're going to die if I don't hoist. So I started hoisting, pulled the last 9 people off the boat, and when I flew back to the base, the duty officer said, consider yourself on report. But it just so happens it was on a Saturday night, a slow news night. They ended up all the local television stations to show what's going on underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And the district commander, the admiral, was home watching this. He says, I'm going to decorate that guy. So 2 days later, in front of national cameras, I got the Coast Guard Service Medal.
And you didn't get a reprimand?
Didn't get a reprimand. didn't get my rank busted.
That's quite a story there. I mean, as a pilot, it's always a fairly high stress situation. Just keeping an airplane in the air, particularly something like a helicopter, which kind of doesn't want to go into the air to begin with. What kind of physical and mental toll does that kind of operating environment put on a crew?
That's a tough question because you're always ready, and you're not hurting anybody, you're helping anybody. So the mindset is always, we've got to save this guy. Like Coast Guard mottos, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And so, but you don't think about that. You think about accomplishing the mission. And then most of the time when you go out, you accomplish the mission, and you get the ecstasy, the adrenaline, and you just feel good. Where it takes a toll on you when you go out and you don't find the sunken boat, or you don't rescue the person. It's like, oh man, what could we have done? And usually there's nothing else we could have done.
Well, it's as you said, it's a branch of the service that is always conducting its mission. And as someone, a Navy veteran myself, who's had the opportunity to work with the Coast Guard on many occasions, always came away very impressed with the capabilities and the dedication to the mission of the Coast Guard. Is there any particular moment where you feel like the teamwork, because I've watched, there's some great TV series out there about the Coast Guard rescue pilots, and the teamwork is really incredible between like a hoist operator and the pilot in those sorts of missions. So can you talk a little bit about and maybe share a mission where that teamwork was really at the fore? Well,
the teamwork's always there, especially the pilot is the aircraft commander, but you have the hoist operator, your crewman is in the back. And once you get over a target, a boat or a person on the rocks or somebody that you're going to hoist, the pilot's mission and job is to maintain a stable position and listen to directions from his crewman. If the crewman says, right 2 feet, you better go right 2 feet. If he goes up 1 foot, you go up 1 foot. So the crewman is always have quasi-control of the mission in dictating to the pilot what needs to be done to accomplish primarily a hoist.
Because in that scenario, whoever's at the bottom of that hoist is the top priority.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to pull them out. And there are times too where you'd go out in the middle of the night and you have no wind, and you have to have a visual reference to be able to hover, keep a stable hover, so your crewman can hoist somebody. And there's one time we were out probably 40 miles outside San Francisco, out in the ocean. It was the middle of the night. It was flat calm. And there's no visual reference because the guy was in the water. And where the guy's in the water, he's behind where the pilot can see. So we took out our approach plates, ripped up all the pages and paper and threw them out the window, because then they were floating around, and that we could steady our view on.
Well, it's incredibly innovative to use one of your manuals and throw it out there. I hope the Coast Guard's come up with something different.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, we could spend all day. I certainly could, listening to stories about flying helos for the Coast Guard. But let's transition then into your life after your military service. What led you to Arizona?
Getting out of the snow. When I was stationed in Chicago, I was there for 5 years and got out of the Coast Guard. And at that time, warm weather was always my getaway. Whenever I take leave, I'd go down to Florida, go down and see some buddies in Texas, or come to Arizona. So when I got out of the Coast Guard, I looked at all three and said, oh, Arizona doesn't have a beach, but it's got everything else. So moved down to Arizona. And one of the happiest days of my life was when I sold my snowblower and moved.
And so, what were you doing at that point? Were you still flying, or you'd had enough of flying for that period?
At that point, I had had enough of flying. I bought a franchise from a company called Success Motivation Institute, which basically taught you how to sell. And so I did that for a couple of years, became a stockbroker for almost 10 years. And then a buddy and I formed another company, and now it's an international corporate relocation company. And in the meantime, I needed to have some fun. So I joined the Civil Air Patrol, only because, well, I had met my wife, and my son, one of my sons, when he was 12 years old, said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to join the Civil Air Patrol, and I think you should too. You could get back to flying." And I said, like most people, "What's the Civil Air Patrol?" So it was interesting, because the Coast Guard's in charge of all offshore search and rescue. The Civil Air Patrol is basically in charge of all inland search and rescue. And then they coordinate with all the sheriff departments and police departments and fire departments. But the Civil Air Patrol, because they have the fixed wings, and most of the other services just have helicopters, they basically take the lead in doing the long-range search.
And so you found yourself back in a cockpit at some point?
Yeah, I found myself back in the cockpit flying for the Civil Air Patrol. And we would fly rescue missions up in the mountains. We'd fly fire patrols up in the mountains. We'd fly border flights. Whenever, before the range goes hot down at the Goldwater Range, we'd fly the border flight looking for unauthorized northbound hikers. And at that time, I happened to be on the Scottsdale Airport Advisory Commission. And as you know, every month when they have their meetings, the staff reads off the noise complaints. And so we were on one flight with another gentleman, Bruce Weber, and I was complaining, saying, you know, I'm tired of all these people complaining about the airport. If they knew about the history of the airport, maybe they wouldn't complain so much. And I was a little bit of a history buff, so I learned all about the history of the airport when I became an airport commissioner. And then went back and just that lit a fire in the head and formed a nonprofit, the Thunderbird Field 2 Veterans Memorial.
And so tell us about Thunderbird Field 2, which people would know it today as Scottsdale Airport.
Right. It's unique in its own way. In 1942, it was built as one of the 3 Thunderbird fields in the Valley of the Sun, with the sole purpose of training U.S. Army Air Corps pilots. It was one of the largest World War II pilot training facilities in the world. And so that was the story. We started, found an airplane because of Bruce, one of his buddies from Nam, lived in Florida, and his daughter married the son of a guy in Cotter, Arkansas, who had an old 1941 Stearman biplane. And he was 93 years old, lost his medical, wanted to get rid of it, so he sold it to us.
And so was that the point when you started thinking about some sort of permanent memorial at Scottsdale Airport?
Yeah, that was the time on that flight when we found that maybe we have an airplane. It was like, well, what can we do with an airplane? Well, it's the same type of plane that flew at Scottsdale. Let's form a permanent memorial. So I met with Gary Mascaro, the airport director, a number of times, presented to city council 3 times, and each time they said, great idea, come back when you have more. So that's when we went out and bought the airplane, formed the nonprofit and bought the airplane, and then came back to city council, says, we have an airplane now, And they said, okay, we'll help you fund it and build the place to house the airplane and the rest of the memorial.
And so it's an incredible visual statement when someone comes to the Scottsdale Aviation Business Center at Scottsdale Airport. But it's a lot more than that. What else is there as part of the Thunderbird Field 2 Memorial?
Okay. Yeah, underneath the airplane is just the centerpiece. As you mentioned, underneath the airplane we have plaques of all the services, including Air Force now, or Space Force. And there are a couple 55-inch touchscreen kiosks that talk about the history of the airport. There are pictures, videos. I actually, before the plane was retired and it was painted, when I bought it, it was painted all yellow because the gentleman we bought it from was a Navy guy and all the Navy trainers were all yellow. And we said, the first thing we need to do is paint it the Army Air Corps colors. And that's what it is now, the blue and yellow. And we had, as soon as we brought it in from Arkansas, and that was an interesting trip too. It took 3 days and 12 fuel stops. But then we had it painted, worked with the city, had it hung as the centerpiece of the memorial. And before it was hung, I actually flew 75 people, veterans and disabled people and donors to help pay for the memorial and the plane. The pictures of everybody I flew is on the kiosk underneath the airplane. We've had a lot of donations inside the building. We call it the Memorial Wing. We probably have 24 pictures, original pictures and artifacts covering the history of the airport. And one of our biggest donors, we have his uniform there. One of the people I flew, in fact, one of the first ones was Captain Jerry Yellen. He's known as the last fighter pilot because he flew the last combat mission of World War II. We invited him out for our first Veterans Day gala, and I spent a lot of time with him and found out that when he grew up in Chicago, joined the Army Air Corps at 18 because he lied about his age, came to Scottsdale and had his very first flight in an identical Stearman at the Thunderbird Field 2 at the Scottsdale Airport. And I gave him a flight in the airplane that's hanging there, and then he actually passed 6 weeks later. So his first flight ever was at Scottsdale, his last flight ever was at Scottsdale. Yeah.
Well, that must have been an incredible honor to get to fly someone like him.
Yeah. That was an honor, and after that, I got invited to go back to his internment at Arlington as a keynote speaker and showed the video of when I flew him on his last flight.
Well, that's an incredible honor as well, of course. Can you talk about maybe some of the biggest challenges of taking this idea for a memorial and turning it into what you've created?
No. Yeah, the biggest challenge was not taking no for an answer. Or like with City Council, I mentioned that we met them 3 times, presented to City Council 3 times, and finally on the 4th time when we had the airplane, they finally said yes. So the biggest challenge was not being deterred from following through on the mission. And so there are a lot of people involved. Originally we were working with the architects out of Scottsdale Community College to design a program, and then Gary Mascaro came back and said, wait a minute, we're redoing the whole business area up where it is now of the main airport. That's the place to have the memorial. So with Gary's help and designing it and just working through everything, initially raising money was always a challenge, but the city came through, all of our donors came through, a lot of volunteers helped make it work.
Why was creating this memorial so important to you?
It's tough to say, but it can get back to what Captain Yellen said with one of his TV interviews. They asked him, what's important about all this stuff? And he came out and said, it's different now. Young people are more inclined to be about them. Older people are more inclined to be what's the history about. And having a memorial and the history of the airport and World War II kind of puts it all in perspective. Because that's why if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be here right now.
And without memorials like that, as an area like Scottsdale and the Phoenix metro area grows up, those little pieces of history could be lost. So certainly, Steve, compliments to you and everybody who has made that memorial a permanent addition. I want to go back to, I mean, you have personally rolled up your sleeves on this, including going to Arkansas and personally flying this World War II biplane from Arkansas back to Scottsdale. And so I want to hear a little bit more, and I know you've got some anecdotes about that journey.
That was a real interesting journey. And it was neat because although I had tons of hours in fixed wing on airplanes, I had never flown a tail wheel before. And I got tail wheel certified when I knew I was going to buy it, and then needed to have somebody else fly with me that was certified and an instructor, because for insurance purposes, you have to have at least 25 hours of tail wheel time to be insured on that airplane. So I found a doctor, a friend that my wife had known being a nurse at Honor Health, and Dr. Mike Flieger. He had his own planes. He was a certified flight instructor, knew tail wheel, so I asked him to come with me. So we flew it together from Arkansas, and he certified me as we went, which was nice. But the plane will do 85 on average, and with a 20-mile-an-hour headwind, you're doing 65, and all the trucks and cars are passing you because we're flying at 500 to 1,000 feet, so we could see everybody and enjoy the scenery. But that was pretty neat.
And what's it like flying an open cockpit airplane for 3 days?
Well, you get a lot of sunburn, even with the wing above your head. But it was interesting. We had in Dallas, when we landed to refuel, we had to wait because our radios had broke, and you're flying around waiting for the green light from the tower that tells you can land. And then we got that fixed a couple days later, and then when it was time to leave, we waited on the ground for 2 hours for the thunderstorms to clear, because we weren't going to go out and fly into thunderstorms, especially cross country.
Well, speaking of getting wet, I know when you landed in Scottsdale, you had a special welcome as well.
Yeah. Well, the big welcome, yeah, we had probably 100 people. Didn't get wet on that one. When I really got wet was when we retired the airplane. It's typical for when you have a dignitary or an airplane or a boat or a high-ranking military official to get a water salute. So in this one, there was just me in the airplane, and I landed, taxied in, and 2 of the Scottsdale Fire Department water fire trucks from the airport were on each side of the taxiway, and as I taxied in, the water shot over, and that's one time I got soaked.
But worth it, I'm sure.
Oh, it was really worth it.
So, Steve, the Thunderbird Field 2 is more than just a place. It's a standing nonprofit, and you're implementing some programs for aviation students as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, what we did probably pretty soon after the memorial was hung, I had met another gentleman by the name of Rudy Miller, who's a big philanthropist, and he said, "Zio, why don't you do scholarships represented by T-Bird?" And I said, "That's a great idea." So then we started a scholarship program for Arizona students going to Arizona colleges and universities enrolled in some sort of aviation program. We wanted to stick with aviation because that's what the airplane and the airport represent, aviation, and we have a big need for pilots, mechanics, avionics technicians. Any field related to aviation, there's a big shortage of people. And so we wanted to help that because it's very expensive to get a pilot's license and to go through and get the ratings to be a mechanic or something. And so we're providing scholarships for them, both 2-year for the 2-year schools and 4-year scholarships for the big schools.
And so you've had a number of young people already taking advantage of that, correct?
Oh yeah, we've provided over $40,000 now in scholarships. I think we're up to probably 17 scholarships that we've given, and some of them are very successful already. The first Emory-Riddle scholarship recipient is now a 747 pilot for a cargo carrier, and some of them are in air traffic control and they're chief pilots, and it's just very pleasing to see that happen.
Well, that's just such a wonderful legacy from how Thunderbird Field 2 started, training people in aviation, and now being able to continue that legacy. So congratulations to you and everyone.
Thank you. Again, it's been a team effort. You know, I may have had the original idea, but it couldn't happen without everybody doing the work.
So if someone watching this wants to visit the memorial, how can they do that?
Drive up Scottsdale Road or down Scottsdale Road to Buthras, turn east, and you'll run right into the airport. You'll run right into the business center, and you'll see the Stearman airplane hanging right there.
And when the airport is open, they can also come in and see some of the artifacts and things in the wing there.
Right, and when you walk in the main door, the wing is almost straight ahead to the left, and that's where all the artifacts are and the pictures. And then if they just want to enjoy the airport, even when the airport's closed, you can still go out there. The Stearman and the plaza are lit up 24/7. So there's always something to do, always something for kids to see.
Well, it's great. I've been there many times, and I do highly recommend it. And I really appreciate you being here. What would you say is next for the organization?
Well, the next for the organization, we actually started about 2 years ago. We felt, yes, we're a veterans organization. Most of our board are veterans, but you don't have to be a veteran to be on our board. But we said, what else can we do for veterans besides this wonderful memorial, and give them a place to go and be pensive and think about it? And so we decided we were going to start supporting different veterans organizations. And we did a lot of research and found one nonprofit that's here in Arizona called Dogs for Vets. And we did a lot of research and liked Dogs for Vets because, unlike a lot of the organizations, so much money goes for administration. In Dogs for Vets, 95% of the money goes for training the dogs and training the vets. And they're unusual because this organization doesn't train a dog and then find a vet to match a dog. They train the dog and the vet together, and they give them free lifetime support. And so we've been supporting the first nonprofit or other veterans organization that we've supported has been Dogs for Vets. And it's been 3 years. Whether we keep on going, I imagine we'll keep on supporting Dogs for Vets, but we're actually also looking for other veterans organizations where we can get in the nitty-gritty and help veterans.
And one of the key ways that you're able to do that is through your gala, your annual gala. So tell us a little bit about what that's like and how one might get involved there.
Oh, that's a fun gala. It's typically around Veterans Day. This coming year, it's going to be on Saturday, November 15th, and we'll have between 300 and 400 people. The neat thing and we always have a keynote speaker. The very first one we had, I mentioned Captain Jerry Yellen was our keynote speaker. We've had a number of them. We have everything from dinner, swing time, 1940s bands. People come dressed in period attire. Some old guys, older than me, they'll come in their old World War II outfits. And then we have a silent auction because it's all to raise money so that we can do the scholarships and support dogs. But we have the skydivers come, and it's just a great, interesting, fun evening.
Well, it sounds like a great way to sort of shine a spotlight on the wonderful organization that you've been such a big part of creating. So, Steve, it's been an honor to be able to sit with you and learn more about your personal history and everything that you're doing for veterans in our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And one other thing, getting back to our gala, if somebody wants to learn more about our organization or the gala or buy tickets for the gala, go to tbird2.org.
And we'll put that right on the screen and make sure everybody can easily find you.
All right, thank you. It's been a neat ride.
Well, I hope it continues for many more years.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.